Hi everyone, welcome to Texas Government. This is your 2306 class. Today we will start talking about Texas government, and before we get to the actual nitty-gritty of Texas government, we will talk about Texas political culture. The reason being that the political culture and the history of Texas has a lot to do with the way Texas government is set up, and it has a lot to do with how we have the Texas government that we do, why we do the things that we do, and why in a lot of instances we as in the state of Texas and its governmental structure is so much more different and is run differently than other state governments. So here we go. Talk to you about here in this instance of why does Texas have this type of culture. There are three reasons I want you to note. The first is Texas, for the most part, has been a one-party state. In this instance, what this means is that for over 100 years until the early 1990s, Texas was a Democratic state. Democrats won state elections. So if 100 years is not tradition, I don't know what is. Now remember, tradition, we just talked about tradition, right? Now occasionally a Republican would win a race, but the seat would always return to Democratic hands. During the 1990s, Republicans began to be competitive at the state level and start to win offices. Starting in the early 2000s, Republicans won every statewide office. Now, the second reason that Texas has that mixed type of culture is called provincialism. This is simply a narrow, limited, and self-interested view of the world. Why would we need to have this view, or why would this view exist? Please note, this view has existed in Texas for many, many years, many generations. However, with the growing influence of other groups, women, minorities, anybody that participates, and the ongoing urbanization of Texas, and we'll discuss urbanization more here shortly. Provincialism is fading. That narrow, limited view is fading. Now, make a question note. What is urbanization? So that when we get to it, you will remember to be sure to highlight. Finally, the third reason is business dominance. Business groups dominate Texas politics due to the organized interest groups that they have, campaign contribution, and lobbyists. So your first reason, Texas was a one-party state for many, many years. The second reason is provincialism. And the third reason is business dominance. Now to continue, what we are looking at here are the geographical regions of the state of Texas. Texas is the second largest state in size in the Union, with four distinct types of regions found within the state. These various types of regions have allowed Texas to maintain a diverse economy. So the first one we'll look at is the Gulf Coast Plains. The Gulf Coast Plains, as you can see on the map, ranges from the lower Rio Grande Valley up to the Rio Grande Plain and all the way northeast towards Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. This is the Gulf Coast Plains. It is located in the eastern and southeastern areas of Texas. This region is the center of Texas timber industry and some of the state's most famous oil fields. It also includes plains for livestock and prime farming land that is suitable for growing cotton, fruit, and winter vegetables. Now, also make note that from the lower Rio Grande Valley, the very bottom tip of the state of Texas is Brownsville. If you carry it and follow the Gulf Coast all the way around towards Louisiana, what do you come to? Which big cities do you come to? Well, stop and think. Brownsville, you have Corpus Christi, definitely Houston, Galveston. What do those three cities have in common? Well, first and foremost, they have ports. So you have a lot of imports and exports that are coming in and out of the state of Texas. So we have a lot of commercial interests as well as everything else that I mentioned. Just here in the city of Houston alone, think of the industries that are major money producers, major employers. We have the oil and gas industry. We have the largest medical center in the state of Texas. We have many universities, so we have educational interests. We have large legal field, a large accounting field. So the state of Texas is very diversified in this just one area alone. If you move forward into the interior lowlands, which includes the north central plains, what you will find here, it's this north central area of Texas. The region has both rural and highly populated metropolitan areas. Consider this is where Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington are located. So the economy is based a lot on agriculture and cattle ranching. We also have industries. This is where you are going to uh, catch uh, part of the high-tech world also up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and in the Austin area. So speaking of Austin, we move towards the Great Plains. We are looking at everything from San Antonio all the way up to Amarillo. This is the northwest and central Texas area. This region has, of course, an economy that is dominated by agriculture. But remember, this part of Texas is always going to have major irrigation issues, water shortages, dry air, dry land. This is where we are going to see wildfires. This is a heavily ranching and petroleum production area. For those of you that don't know, where the state of Texas makes its backwards L and it meets up with New Mexico there in Odessa, Midland, we have a large area of oil and gas production going on there. And then lastly, we have the Basin and Range Province. This last region is the far west part of Texas. Rainfall here is very sparse. It is a very mountainous area, but of course, you do still have industry, a lot of tourism, a lot of commercial exchange, because we are talking about the upper Rio Grande Valley. So we have an open border between El Paso and Mexico. So we have people coming and going from Texas to Mexico, from Mexico to Texas for work and education purposes, as well as tourism, or to just come over for the day and go shop. So stop and consider everything that I have just shared with you, and anywhere else that you may have been. The type of industries. Do they have tourism? Think of San Antonio. How much is San Antonio known for their tourism? But as far as tourism goes, it's not their only industry. They have multiple military bases that are in the San Antonio area. They also have a medical center that they are very well known for. Dallas Fort Worth have their commercial interests. Austin has become a very high-tech area with Dell, Apple, all of them having offices up in that area. Texas is a very diverse state when it comes to not just its geographical regions, but its ability to have differences in economic interests. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of this course. Just as we have geographic regions, we also have political regions for the state of Texas. In East Texas, this culture is largely an extension of the Old South. There is still a large plantation mentality that exists. It is a very conservative area of the state of Texas. Of course, there has been a lot of new immigration and migration in country and in state migration that has become a part of Texas. So a lot of that is changing. But still, what you see is that the east part of the state of Texas is still a very heavily conservative part and still maintains a large extension of the Old South mentality. Now, moving back to the Gulf Coast, this is epitomized by Houston. It is the largest city in the state of Texas, as well as the largest city on the Gulf Coast. The Gulf Coast of Texas, of course, is very large. It stretches for a large portion of the Gulf of Mexico and has an economy that is based on oil and ocean shipping. It is, though, a very diverse culture that you will find along the Gulf Coast, which attracts immigrants not only from all over the United States, but from all over the world. Now, the south and southwest parts of the state of Texas are heavily Hispanic and have a heavily agricultural influence, which of course means that this part of the state of Texas receives much national attention due to the continued immigration from Mexico and Central America, much of it, of course, being illegal. There are also problems involving illegal drugs as well as weapons and violence that have accompanied the political debate over immigration in the Texas border regions. Keep an eye on this as we are in an election year. Please be assured that this subject and this issue will come up. So please make note to watch out for this kind of rhetoric and these types of articles and news items that, of course, will involve not just the south and southwest of the United States, but Texas in particular. Now, the next political region is the Texas Hill Country or the Hill Country. It is a large German cultural population that settled in this area. It is, of course, named for the terrain that you will find. To this day, it still retains a lot of its German cultural identity. If you go to that part of the state, it is now a large tourist area as well as known for multiple vineyards that you will find there. Now, the next political area is the West Texas area, and this will include the Panhandle. Now, West Texas and the Panhandle of Texas are largely rural, also very conservative and agricultural in nature. Of course, there is a large mix of oil exploration that you will find now, especially in the Midland, Odessa area. Of course, there is, like I said, some tourist and a lot of commercial interest actually in the El Paso area. But mostly right now, what we see is that it is still a very conservative and rural part of the state. Now, the next thing we will talk about quickly is the economic changes in the state of Texas. Now, The Texas economy has undergone a series of dramatic changes since the early 19th century. There has been a theory called the theory of creative destruction. That is a theory by Joseph Schumpeter. And what this does is it provides us with a useful lens through which to view these changes. Now, this theory argues that capitalism is subject to periodic waves of transformation. So, here we will quickly go over some of these waves of economic change in the state of Texas. Now, you can say that the first wave centered on cotton and cattle production and their distribution by railroad. The second wave in the economic change of Texas grew out of the oil industry. And currently we are experiencing a third wave of change, and this third wave is tied to the high-tech economy. So first we will focus on cotton. In case some of you are too young to know, cotton is known as the king industry. Cotton is king. It is one of the oldest crops in Texas. Now, serious cotton cultivation began in 1821 with the arrival of Anglo-Americans. By 1880, Texas led all states in the production of cotton in most years. Among other things, high production was fueled by the introduction of barbed wire, which allowed farmers to protect their crops from grazing, and railroads, which brought Texas cotton to the national market. Of course, an influx of immigration from other states created a labor market that also fueled cotton production growth. By the 1800s, half of Texas farmers were tenant farmers, meaning they were sharecroppers. This system ignited radical political discontent in rural areas, giving force to the Grange and populist movements. So even as far back as the 1800s, we were having political discord. Now, cotton production cycled up and down in the late 19th and early 20th century, and then went into serious decline after World War I. However, the industry is still important as Texas is the source of about 1/4 of all cotton produced in the United States. So from cotton, we will go to cattle ranching. Now, of course, if you are taking this class with me online or in person, and you see these little blue underlined titles, of course, these are links to other web pages. Please look for the full PowerPoint on Canvas and click through. Of course, you will not be able to click through on the video, but you can click through through the actual PowerPoints. These are just for your information so you can gather more insight into what I am into the information that I am providing you. Now, cattle ranching, of course, dates back to the 17th century. The history of ranching and the cattle industry parallels that of cotton. Ranching became massive in scale, of course, when the railroads opened up new markets. Fenced pasturing also helped the industry evolve. After the Civil War, the cattle industry took off. Throughout the 20th century, the industry went through periods of boom and bust. Like the cotton industry, cattle ranching remains important. Texas generally leads the nation in the number and value of cattle. However, neither cotton nor ranching drives the Texas economy like it has in the past. Now we move on to oil. The first significant oil discovery in Texas was in 1894. By 1898, the first oil refinery in the state was in operation. The discovery of the Spindletop sites in 1901 catapulted the state into the era of gas and oil. Oil fever spread throughout Texas over the next decade. By the 1930s, the Texas economy was powered by petroleum. This transformed the social and economic fabric of Texas in several ways. Cheap oil and gas provided new fuel for transportation and manufacturing and encouraged automobile production and road construction. By the 1950s and 60s, the interstate highway system had changed the movement of people and goods in Texas. The oil and gas booms affected the state's economic life. The boom brought increasing numbers of people to towns and lacking appropriate housing and schooling. Price collapses could turn boom towns into ghost towns. The oil and gas industry also transformed the role of the government in the economy. It helped government expand its regulatory power over the state's oil and gas industry. The industry had an important fiscal effect on state government. Beginning in 1905, the state started to tax oil production, creating a new revenue system. By 2011, natural gas production taxes contributed $2 billion to the state budget. The oil and gas industry also became a boom to some public universities in Texas when oil was discovered on university land in 1923. That one is for the University of Texas. The University of Texas actually receives a lot of money from oil that was discovered on lands that they owned. In the 1990s, the economy continued to diversify, and the high-tech industry began to assume a more significant role in the state's economy. So moving from the oil and gas economy to the high-tech economy was not easy. During the 1980s, the oil-based economy increased production rapidly. With the collapse of oil prices in the 80s, other economy sectors suffered. Real estate prices fell, construction shutdowns, speculators defaulted on loans, and banks failed. Texas emerged from the two economic recessions with a transformed economy. The 90s was a period of rapid growth for the high-tech manufacturing sector, and Texas went from the seventh nationwide unemployment in manufacturing to second. By 2008, 13% of the total state gross domestic product, which was $168 billion, came from manufacturing. So what we are discussing here when we are talking about high-tech items, we are talking about computer chips, personal computers, computer accessories. All of these are now created around the Dallas and Austin areas. Don't forget, Dell is based in Round Rock, Texas. So those computers, all those chips, everything comes from that area of Texas. When we talk about the Texas economy, we also have to talk about NAFTA. Now, signed into law in 1992, the North American Free Trade Agreement affected the Texas economy. NAFTA was a trade treaty between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico that lowered barriers between the three countries. It essentially created a free trade zone. The agreement had both negative and positive impacts on Texas. NAFTA was responsible for a state increase in exports to Mexico and Canada. Now, in 2010, the NAFTA zone accounted for 44% of Texas's exports overall. However, one study found that approximately 55,000 Texas workers had lost their jobs due to stiffer competition from the low-wage businesses in Mexico or because plants had been relocated to Mexico. Now, today, NAFTA is called USMCA, which stands for the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. This was just ratified late last year by all three countries' legislatures. It is not much different from what NAFTA proposed. There is an article placed in your Canvas module so that you can read more on what the USMCA is supposed to do. Now, we cannot have boom without bust, so we will talk about also the 2007 recession. In 2007, the US entered a period of systemic economic crisis. Now, this came about because of a credit market that was brought about by speculative housing lending. So, what they did is the banks lent out a lot of money to build a lot of houses, a lot of apartments, condos, and in turn, all of these were sold at high prices to the buyers who then defaulted on their loans because they couldn't keep up the payments on them. So this turned into a recession in 2007. But compared to the rest of the nation, Texas actually weathered the storm fairly well. We had relatively minor dips in the housing and banking industries in 2007, and that is because of our diverse economy. In 2010, Texas saw an increase in jobs, signaling it might pull out of the recession before the rest of the country. And this also helped Texas because Texas has diversified its economy. It had insulated the state from much rougher economic events that we could have seen, like we saw across the country. So when you stop and consider the state of Texas on an economic basis is much more likely to weather any recession that we have because we are so diversified in industry, in employers. Now, currently, we are seeing a major downturn in jobs, not just in Texas, but across the country because of the COVID-19 pandemic and all the closures that came about because of it. These are going to be long-term effects. We are going to have to wait and see what happens between the end of 2020 and the next 2 to 3 years. Will a lot of these jobs come back? Of course they will, but they will not be the same type. You are not going to return to the same type of job that you had, or you may have to change what you do. There's a lot that is still up in the air when it comes to the economy in Texas in this new age that we are having to weather. So be sure you keep an eye on what is going on, not just in the state, but across the country. If you are one of those that was affected adversely by the COVID-19 closures, I'm sure this is going to be of great importance to you. As we follow the rest of the course for the semester, you will see that economy plays a big part in the state of Texas and in government, not just at the state level, but at the local level. So please be aware of what's going on in the news, not just in your city, community, or state, but across the country and across the world. I will stop here for now, and I will talk to you guys for the second part of this Texas political culture in the next video. Until then, thanks. Bye.